All right, everyone. Good evening. We're ready to get started. We're going to be learning tonight Maseches Shabbos, Daf Kuf Nun Amud Beis and Daf Kuf Nun Aleph. And we're right now in the middle of a sugya, kind of about what we are allowed to talk about on Shabbos. So we're on the bottom of Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, about 4 lines from the bottom with Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and let us jump right in. As I mentioned, my battery is at about 30%. So we need to learn Torah l'shem shamayim is what we need to do right now, and quickly. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, cheshbonos shel malach v'shel mabekach muter l'chashbein b'Shabbos. It's permissible to articulate malach. Rashi points out the 2 words of these whatever trinkets of conversation, nothing chashuv. You're allowed to talk about things that don't have a lot of meaning. That's true halachically. Hashkafically, it may be a separate conversation, but it's mutter to speak about certain things. We'll get into more detail shortly. Those are permissible to speak about on Shabbos. Tanya Nami Hachi, this brisa is very confusing and requires the Gemara that follows it to explain it. But this Gemara supposedly supports our statement of Rabbi Yehuda. How so? The first part doesn't, but the second part does. Cheshbonos she'avru ve'she'asidin lichios, things that have happened in the past and that will happen in the future, that we say asr lechashbon, that you're not allowed to talk about. However, shel malach v'shel mabekach muter lechoshvan, that's permissible. So it's a little bit difficult to understand because in the first part of this brisa, it said things that happened in the past we're allowed to talk about, but it doesn't seem to say that. But in the first part, in Rabbi Yehuda's statement, it seems to say you can talk about things that are not relevant. Aren't things in the past things that are not relevant? Why is it that that's not allowed in this brisa? But anyways, this does support a concept, and the Gemara questions this right away. Urminu, I don't understand. Choshvin cheshbonos she'einan tzrichen. You're allowed to talk about things that you don't need to talk about. Ve'ein machshavin. You're not allowed to make cheshbonos. Ve'ein machshavin cheshbonos she'tzrichen b'Shabbos. And you're not allowed to make numbers, to speak about numbers and math and topics that you do need, that are helpful to you. Let's say you're trying to figure out how much money can I work out the down payment on a house. That you're not allowed to do because that's something that's tzrichen. But something that's ein tzrichen, stam to do math, that is something that you would be allowed to do, as long as it's not practical. So it says the Gemara, 3rd line, Kufnun Amud Beis Ketzad, Omer Adam lechavero, kach v'kach poalim hiskarti, language change, hiskarti al sadazu. In the past, I hired X number of employees on the field, or kach v'kach dinar and hotzesi al dirazo. In the past, I spent money on this piece of property. Aval, what are you not allowed to say? Lo yomar lo kach v'kach hotzesi v'kach v'kach ani asi lahotzi. Not only that, but in the future, I'm also going to spend money. And this is the Gemara's question, is that I don't understand. What about the things that happened in the past? It seems here that you're not allowed. But Yehuda seems to say that it is allowed. So this is a very confusing brisa. Says the Gemara, the brisa itself is problematic. Well, the tamech, according to you, kashelach gufa. What is going on here? There's too many subtle slivers of trying to understand the past, mabekach, like the malach, very, very unclear from the Gemara. And thank God the Gemara does give us this punchline, which helps us to understand. Ella, and this will lead us to the 2 dots and give us our halachic conclusion, both in the Gemara and halacha l'maisa. Hadiika agra de agira gabe, hadaleika agra de agira gabe. When you've already finished paying off the project, you can talk about it. The house that I bought, I spent $400,000 on it. Construction cost me another $1. That's fine. What you can't say is that the project that I'm working on now, and you still have outstanding bills, oh, that project is $400,000. They're not quite done putting in the basement yet. That's another. You can do it without the numbers, but you can't speak about it with the numbers. That would be a violation of a davar about speaking about things on Shabbos that you should not. So this is the chakira that is made in the Gemara about when there's outstanding payments to be made, you should still not be talking about it. When the project is done, you can say how much your house is worth. Says the Gemara, Ein machshich, and we spoke about this yesterday. You're not allowed to go to the edge of your tchum in order to. You're not allowed to go to the edge of your tchum in order to stand there to do something that is problematic. We'll see what that means. This man had a field and the wall broke down in his head. He decided in his head that he was going to rebuild the fence. He wasn't going to build it on Shabbos, but it crossed his mind to do so on Shabbos. The Nizkar Shabbos, of course he didn't do it. You remembered it's Shabbos. The Nimna Osa Chasid Velo Gadra, and as a self-inflicted consequence, because he didn't treat Shabbos right, because he had a machshava to build the wall. He didn't build the wall. Because of that machshava, he never rebuilt the wall. And then says the Gemara, "V'naseh lo nes," also both salaf. He grew a tree, a caper tree, one that is very profitable apparently. Mimena haisa parnasasu parnasas anshe beso. The Mephoshim Shemir point out that there are many parts of the caper tree. We've also learned this in previous amudim in this Masechta as well, that the caper bush that Slav has unique elements to it, and multiple parts are for sale. And this was the nace that was done for this person. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Mutter la'adam lomar lechaver lekrach ploni ani holech lamachar she'im yesh burgenin holech. I'm going to city X tomorrow, even though it's outside the tchum. Why am I allowed to do that? Because in theory, had there been burgenin, had there been huts that would have broken up the tchum, then it would have been permissible for me to walk there. So it's a theoretical kula. It's like a loophole of sorts. Because you're 4,000 amos away. But if had there been a hut at the 1999 amos line, then I would have been able, so the Gemara says, okay, interesting halacha. We're going to question that from a couple of different angles. And here is question number 1. 1/3 of the way down, Kuf Nun Amid Beis. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, you're not allowed to go to the edge of your tchum, so that immediately when Shabbos goes out, that you can be socher po'alim, that you can hire people, ulahavi peros, and you also can't do it to bring in fruits. It says the Gemara, Bishlama, I understand your opinion about liskor po'alim, de b'Shabbos lo matziagar. I understand that because on Shabbos it's never mutter to hire anyone to do anything on Shabbos. That's not allowed. Elahavi peros, to carry fruits. Well, why don't I say the same rationale that you just tried 5 lines ago, which is, what if there was a theoretical hut to extend my tchum? Lema she'im yesha mechitzos, maybe if there were theoretical walls that I could carry, and maybe. So I don't understand. Why are you saying that you can apply the rationale of Burgenin, that I can extend my tchum, as we saw above, but over here by the Peros we're not allowed to? Answers the Gemara with an ukimta, practical answer. Mishkachas lebeperos hamichubarin. The reason why you can't use that svara here is because the fruits are still connected to the ground and you're never allowed to do kotzer. But you're right, in Ochanami, had it been the case that it was only a question of lahavi peros, then it would have been permissible to do so had it been that there were theoretical walls. So it says the Gemara, Ve'atani Ravoshia, Ein machshichen al hatchum lahavi teven v'kash. What about this? We have teven and kash. Teven is straw that is which one is it? Teven is straw that is connected to the ground, and kash is separated. So bishlama kash, I understand why you'd say that it's permissible to be machshech on the kash. Mishkachas, I'm sorry, the kash is connected to the ground. I apologize. Kash is connected, teven is not. Bishlama kash, I understand why you cannot go to the edge of your tchum in order to pick up the kash, this connected form of straw. That I understand. If it's connected to the ground, of course you cannot go to the edge of your tchum, so then immediately after Shabbos you can pick up the kash. That's not allowed. What about teven? That's separated, and therefore maybe I should have argued about like the Borganin that I should apply the theoretical loophole of had there been huts, then it's permissible for one to then go to the tchum on Shabbos, to the edge of your tchum. Says the Gemara, b'tivna saria. No, this is disgusting teven. It's spoiled. But you're right. Had it been the case that this teven had already been cut and it wasn't connected to the ground and it wasn't disgusting, then yes, I would have been able to walk to the edge of my tchum. And in other words, before we move on, this is the conclusion of the Gemara: is that we allow for the loophole thinking. I'm allowed to walk to the edge of my tchum for a purpose that is otherwise theoretically mutter, just limited by the fact that I'm missing a mechitza or I'm missing the burg and then I'm missing the huts. So that's how the Gemara concludes here. We are a little bit more than halfway down. Kuf Nun Amid Beis Tashma. What do we learn? Let's see what it says in the Gemara here. In this source in the Tanoim, one is allowed to go to the edge of their tchum in order for the sake of helping a kala or for the sake of taking care of a mace. And the Gemara makes a diuk and says as follows: Aliske kala umeis in, aliske acher lo. You're only allowed to do it in regards to iske kala and iske mace, but not for acher, not for anything else. So says the Gemara, Bishlama acher, I could understand that there's something else. This acher that you're saying is forbidden, that it's still dumya de kala. I could come up with a case that's not allowed. Mishkachas la lemigza le asa. The case that you're talking about that's problematic by a kala is where you go to the edge of your tchum in order to cut myrtle, a type of beautiful branch that you want to bring to the chuppah. That I understand. That's the case that's not allowed by a kala. Ela mace, my nihu. What is the case that we're talking about in regards to a mace that's problematic? Mind you, are we talking about a case lahavi lo aron b'tachrichet? Are we talking about a case where we're saying that you're not allowed to bring the casket and the garments? The katani mace in aval acher lo. There we would say it's not allowed. V'amai. Why would that not be allowed? We should extend the same principle that we've already learned. Lema she'im yesh machitzos, maybe mace. I don't understand. Maybe mace nami. It should also be permissible to do that. Why don't we apply the theoretical loophole that had it been that there were mechitzos, that we could bring in the casket right after Shabbos? I could walk up to the edge of the tchum before Tzeis HaKochavim. Good to go. Answers the Gemara. Mishkachas la lemigzale gelima. The reason why you're not allowed to bring in the casket, the reason why you're not allowed to walk to the edge of the tchum, the edge of the 2,000 amos, so that right when Shabbos is over, you can be osek b'tzorchei mace and bring in the casket and the tachrichet that are right outside the tchum. The reason why is because we were afraid that you would actually have to cut the garment that you would need, and that, of course, is not allowed. But again, back to the same principle that we had already learned, which is that as long as that what you're doing is theoretically possible with walls, then we should then assume that it is permissible to do on Shabbos. You can walk to the edge of the tchum, and we can use the theoretical loopholes of burgenin, of walls, of mechitzos, to extend that leniency to walk to the edge of that tchum. Says the Gemara, quoting our Mishnah from the previous Amud Aval Machshifin, there are cases where we said that you're allowed to go to the end of the tchum, as we just discussed. Well, how does that work with Havdalah? Because in general, what do we see? Even though Shabbos is now over, I look up in the sky, I see my 3 Benoni stars that we learned already. I don't even remember what Masechta was in, probably this one, if not Maseches Shabbos. When did we learn that? Anybody know? 3 medium stars? It's brachos, right? Anybody? I don't know. We learned it at some point. So you look up at the stars, you're at the 1,999th Am of your 2,000 Amos, and you have a heter to do that because whatever is right beyond the Amos, is beyond the 2,000, it's fine. But you look up and Shabbos is over. So says the Gemara, you didn't make Abdullah yet? Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, first and foremost, you should make Abdullah. And then we can talk about you doing your avoda. You daven Marav out there, you said Atachon Antanu. So maybe we should consider that Havdalah. But we know the Dina, we pass in this way. We know that Ladina, that even though it's true that a person who says Atachon Antanu, they're then allowed to do Malacha, that's true. If Tzeis HaKochavim plus an Amira, plus either Atachon Antanu or Baruch HaMavdil occurred, so fine, then I understand that you can do Malacha, but you still need to do Havdalah al HaKos, and maybe that's Le'ikuva in regards to you doing your Avoda, not that it's Malacha, but you should not be doing it. So says the Gemara, 6-7 lines from the bottom of Kuf Nun Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, V'chitema de'avdil al hakos. Even if you want to say, fine, he did do al hakos. You're in the middle of a field. What, do you have a bottle of wine in your back pocket? There are very few people who travel with wine. I happen to be one of them, but it's very, very rare. You don't look in people's cars and see bottles of wine rolling around under most circumstances. Here, you're in the middle of the field. Kos besadeh mi'ika. How could you argue that the guy David Marvin said Atachon Antanu and then chapped a cup of wine to say Abdallah ala kos? How can that be? So it says the Gemara, Tir Gemara, Rabbi Nasan Bar Ami, Kame de Rava, Bein Hagisos Shanu. It is possible because people had wine presses and they weren't all in the city. Sometimes normally you had the wine presses by the grapes, and those were out in the field. So it's possible that a person could have done that. Seemingly, if we were to stop right here, it would seem to be the case that one should not do any, when I say malach, I don't mean in a halachic way, but you shouldn't be involved in other things until you've said Havdalah, even if you've already said Atachon Antanu or Baruch HaMavdil, because we still would prefer to say Havdalah ala kos. Because the Gemara went as far to say that maybe it's by the Gitos, maybe he's standing near the grapevines and there's some wine out there from. So that's a very far idea. It could be that it's Lamaisa. We'd have to look at the poskim and see. Omer le Rabbi Abba le Ravashi b'Ma'arava. Out in the west, what did we do? Amrinan hachi. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, and then ve'avdinan tzorchin. We do this all the time. If you skip Atachon Antanu, you cannot get in your car yet. You're not allowed to do malacha until you're mavdil in one way or another. So if you're going to be mavdil b'peh, you have to do something. You forgot Atachon Antanu, that you need to say Baruch HaMavdil ben kodesh l'chol. We don't paskin this way, but there are some poskim who say you have to say Baruch Atah Hashem HaMavdil ben kodesh l'chol, Baruch Hashem u'malchus. Why not? You still have to mavdil ala kos. You'll say the bracha again later. We don't paskin that way, but it is a shita that's found in the poskim, and that's what the Gemara says in the name of Rav Ashi, that they used to say Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, and then in the saltinan silti, then they would cut wood. Okay, if we just flip back one page and look at our Mishnah, we'll see that there were three statements that took place in our Mishnah. The first was a limiting one. The Mishnah on the top of Kuf Nun Amud Aleph said, you're not allowed to hire Poalim. You're not allowed to ask your friends for that. And we spoke about Machshichin ala Tchum. And then it said, but you are allowed to do so to watch your fruit. And then the last din said, Klal Amar Rabbi Amar Abba Shaul. And the Gemara is torn about how to understand this statement of Abba Shaul. Now, the Gemara's assumption, I'll just foreshadow a little bit. The Gemara's assumption is that when we have a klal, its beginning point is at a previous statement's end point. And that's going to be very important for us to understand what's going on in this Gemara here. Let's get started. Kuf Nun Amud Beis toward the bottom. Klal Amar Abba Shaul Kol She'ani. Let's see what happened here. Abba Shaul Ahaya. What statement of our Mishnah is Abba Shaul commenting on? Ilema Aresha Koi. If he's talking about the beginning, what did it say there? Ein machshichan ala tchum liskor poalim lahavi peiros. There we said that a person is not allowed to go to the end of their tchum for the sake of hiring someone who's standing just outside the threshold, and also for fruit. If that's the case, then this statement of Abba Shaul doesn't make sense. It shouldn't have been said kol she'ani zakai ba'amiraso rishai ani b'chashichaso. That's wrong, because if the klal is always going to start at the previous statement's endpoint, well, the previous statement endpoint was be'isr, then it should have said kol she'eni zakoi. Because we were talking, again, if it's on the Reisha, then it should say kol she'eni zakoi, because the Reisha was talking about something that's not allowed. So then Abba Shaul's statement should have been kol she'eni zakoi b'amiraso eni rishai b'chashichaso mi'bayle. So therefore, says the Gemara, Abba Shaul's comments can't be contrasting statement number one of the Mishnah on Kuf Nun Amud Aleph. What therefore, Kuf Nun Amud Beis. So therefore, what must it be? Ella, third line, Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph Ella Aseifa. It must be talking about the end. Let's see what the Seifa said. Aval machshechu lishmor. You're allowed to go stand there to overlook your fruits. Nothing wrong with looking. Maybe peros biyado, and afterwards you're allowed to carry it in. Then this statement of Abba Shaul, which would then read kol she'ani zakai b'chashichaso rishoy ani ba'amiraso miboyle. Then it shouldn't have spoken about the amira first. It should have spoken about the chashicha first. But our statement in our Mishnah says the amira before the chashicha. Our statement says kol she'ani zakai ba'amiraso. But then again, if Abba Shaul's comment is supposed to start where the previous statement led off, then it's backwards. It should have spoken about amira first and not chashicha. Therefore, the Gemara adds in something to the Mishnah which is nowhere to be found. Says the Gemara, le'olam aseifa koi. Really, it is talking about the seifa, but the Abba Shaul ahakoi, there's something missing in our Mishnah. What is that? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, a statement of Shmuel. Shmuel said as follows: Muter la'adam lomer lechavero shemor li peiro shebetchumcha v'ani eshmor lecha peiro shebetchumi. You in your yard save me some fruit, and I'll save you some in mine. V'ka'amar Abba Shaul l'tanakama. And Abba Shaul, in our Mishnah, this is some added banter that we don't see in our Mishnah. What does he say to the Tanakama? Milo Modis, Tanakama, wouldn't you admit to me the mutter adam lomar lechaver shemorli peres shebetchumcha, dani eshmor lecha peres shebetchumi? Wouldn't you agree that that's the case? That it's permissible for us to save fruit in each other's yards, and we can trade after Shabbos. Ve'ema, and there I would have said the line, and it fits perfectly here. Kol she'ani zakai ba'amiraso rishoy ani lahachshechalav. This is where Abba Shaul fits in perfectly, right where the previous statement left off. What was Shmuel talking about? Shmuel was talking about the fact that you're allowed to say to someone, be'amira, you're allowed to say fruit for me, I can say fruit for you. On that, Abba Shaul talks about amira. Kol she'ani zakai ba'amiraso rishoy ani lahachshechalav. And therefore, in a case where you and your friend are going to trade fruit from one yard to the next, there Abba Shaul adds a leniency that I could be machshech on that I could go to the end of my tchum in order to trade fruits after Shabbos. Now, in general, whenever we see the word klal in a Mishnah, we always ask the question of la'asuye mai. And here too, we're going to do the same. So it says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, klal la'asuye mai. The klal that Abba Shaul was speaking about, what does that come to teach us? So it says the Gemara, Hadatan Rabban, and it teaches us something that is found in a Tosefta in Perek Yudches of Maseches Shabbos. What is that? Well, it's not going to be the case of Ein Machshichin because Abba Shaul was teaching a Kula. So we'll have to see what his Kula was. Ein Machshichin ala tchum lehavi behema. You're not allowed to go up to the edge of your tchum to bring back in an animal immediately after Shabbos. That's not allowed. However, Haisa Omedes chutz l'tchum. If there's an animal standing at Amma distance of 2020, and you are at Amma distance of 1990, you're within your Alpayim Amma, So korela v'hiba, you're allowed to talk. You can talk to the animal. There, that's where Abba Shalom's Kaddish is that there's a leniency. You can talk to the cow and say, come back, come back. I don't know if they speak. I don't know if they understand, but if you can talk in a way that's meaningful, there, klal amar Abba Shal kol sheni zakai b'ami raso rishayni lahachshechala. That's where Abba Shal's klal is extended to. You can't go to the end of your 2,000 amos so that after Shabbos you can walk out and pick up the animal. That's not allowed. What is allowed is to walk there so that you can talk to the animal so that it can come back. And that's what Abba Shal, cooing it in. If it works. I don't know, can you train a cow? Please come here. You can do that with dogs. There's some animals that can be trained. Dolphins are very bright. Cows, I don't know. I have no idea. Next case, 1/3 of the way down, a little bit more. On Kufn and Aleph, Amar Aleph, let us continue. Says the Gemara, where am I? You are allowed to go to the end of your 2,000 amos. Lefakech al iske kala ve'al iske hameis, as we've spoken about already. Lahavi lo aron v'tachrichin. You're allowed to go to the end of your 2,000 amos so that if you were to need to bring in an aron and tachrichin, the clothes that a mace would wear, that's fine. And when you're standing there, you're also allowed to talk to someone who's on the other side of that. Let's say a guy is helping you there. Ve'omrim lo lech lemakom ploni. Go look for in city X or in community Y. Go look somewhere else. You got to find it. We're allowed to work on the Iske Mace while we stand at the edge of our tchum. No problem at all. And this Tana holds that you're even allowed to be explicit about money. You can't get the casket at 100. Pay 200. What can I tell you? Never. We have to bury the person. That we mitzvah d'oraisa that this person has to be buried. Rabbi Yehuda argues on this last part of the shita. You're allowed to go to the tchum even according to Rabbi Yehuda. What you're not allowed to do is what he says. You're not allowed to give him a number. You can say, go pay what is necessary within reason. You can be vague. You can be a little bit unclear. That's fine. But you're not allowed to be specific. Next Mishnah, halfway down, Kufnan Aleph, Amud Aleph. Machshichan, we saw this already, but now this is the actual Marimakum where it belongs. We've seen it twice already. Machshichan ala tchum lefakech al iske kalav al iske hameis. That we said already, that you're allowed to go to the edge of your tchum in order to take care of matters of a kala and matters of a mace. What about nachri shehevi chalilin? The flutes, as we have them now, is a beautiful instrument that we incorporate into our multi-piece bands in the weddings that we used to have before the coronavirus. Now, we don't really have that. But back in the day, they did not use flutes that often. And in fact, they were used in a way to induce a sense of crying. It's like crazy to us because we would never, if you're an Avelis, you're not allowed to hear live music. Yet here, it seems to be that it was almost a standard of sorts. So let's say that a Nachri bought the Chalil b'Shabbos. The halacha is lo yisbo behen Yisrael. A Yid cannot use that at the Hespedim. Nowadays, we wouldn't do this anyways. Elim Kain, when are you allowed to use the Chalil? Elim Kain, bo mi makom karov. You would have to, only if it's very close. Asu lo aron v'chafru lo kever. Let's say that a casket was made and they dug a hole, not for a Jew, but for a goy. So then you cover bo Yisrael, then a Yid can be buried there after Shabbos, being bishvil Yisrael. But if it was built, if the person who dug it knew that a Jew died and he dug the hole, he dug the kever for a Yid, then lo yikaver bo olamis. Then you're never allowed to do that. This is touching now in sugyas of Maseches Shabbos. Are you allowed to benefit from a halacha that was done on Shabbos? Says the Gemara. We said that when are you allowed to use the flutes if they came from a place that's very close? My makom karov, Rav amar mi makom karov mamish. Within my 2,000 amos. Let's be very, very close. No violations can be done with this. Says the Gemara, Ushmuel Amar, a dissenting opinion. No, it can even be a suffix. Maybe it just came from a little bit outside the wall. Maybe, we're not sure. So the suffix is sufficient to allow using it. The Gemara is now going to bring Tanai precedents for both of these shitas. Shmuel was of the opinion of being a little bit more lenient, and our Mishnah seems to be like that. How so? The Katani, the Mishnah writes, Asalo Aron v'chafar lo kever. We see that if a guy were to make a casket and dig a kever, yikaver bo Yisrael, alma misfeka shari. There's an element of suffix there. You don't know exactly what his motivations were. He didn't tell you he was doing it for a Jew. He just kind of did it. And we see in a case of suffix that our Mishnah allows it. So too Shmuel allows us to use the Chalil that was brought by a guy when there's a case of suffix of where it came from. And that's the Tanai precedent, Tachanami with the flutes, misfeka shari. But Vitanya Kavase de Rav, there's also a Marimakum that supports Rav, that when we are unsure about where something comes from, in the flute in our case, you're not allowed to use it. Unlike Shmuel, how does that play out? Says the Gemara, let's say that you're living in a city where Jews and non-Jews live amongst themselves, a community like ours, and there's a public bathhouse, and you have a need to go into that bathhouse beheter on Shabbos. Im rov nachrim, if most of the people, sorry, you're not going on Shabbos. Im rov nachrim, if most of the people who live there are goyim, le'erev rochetz b'miyad. The second Shabbos lets out, you can go into that bathhouse and bathe, no problem. You don't have to wait at all. You can just hop right in, Abdullah, but you don't have to wait in regards to how long would it have taken. That's what we call b'chdei sheyasu. B'chdei sheyasu is a rabbinic injunction of benefiting from a malacha that was done on Shabbos. So what the Gemara is saying here is that because rov of the city is nachrim, so the Beis HaMerchatz is not for you, it's for the rov. And because it's for the rov, we don't have the rabbinic injunction of needing to wait. How long would it take for the malacha to take place, to cook up all that water for me to go in the Beis HaMerchatz? No concerns if it's rov nachrim. Le'erev roches b'miyad. In rov Yisrael, but if most of the people in the city were Yidden, and there was a bathhouse, yamtin ad kedei sheyechamu. Here we would have to say that you have to wait until it would take, whatever, let's say it takes 20 minutes. You have to wait 20 minutes after Shabbos is over to go to the Beis HaMerchatz, however long it would take sheyechamu chamen in order to warm up the waters. Now, here's our case. Mechza al mechza, this is a raya to Rav, we said, who was strict about the case of the flute. He said we have to know where it's coming from. You can't not know where it's coming from. A suffix won't work. Says the Gemara, mechza al mechza, ad kedei sheyichamu chamen. There we have the rabbinic injunction of waiting. What do we see from this brisa? We see from this brisa that in the case of mechza al mechza, where the city is 50-50 Jews to non-Jews, we say that we're strict and you have to wait. Says Rav, so too by the flute. When we're not sure where it came from, if there's an element of suffix, we're makbid, and therefore Rav and Shmuel, both of them have a precedent in the Tanaim. Continuing that brisa because it's here, though not because it's specifically relevant to Rav, it's just a continuation of the brisa that supported Rav. Rav Yehuda Omer ba'ambati ktana, if it's a smaller bath, im yeshba rashos, if there is a rashos, we'll see what that means in a moment, roches b'miyad, no need to wait b'chdei sheyasu, no rabbinic injunction. My rashos, what is this idea of a rashos? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Bereid Rav Yehuda. Adam chashuv sheyesh lo asara avadim. There's a person, he has all of these servants who are serving him. Shemachamim lo yud kum kimin. Their servants have warmed up, each of them carrying one hot thing of water. They walk over, they pour it into this little, I envision it like a small jacuzzi of some kind. They're pouring in the water, so that you don't have to wait on. When it's very small, and when it was for someone chashuv, who has a bunch of avadim, then we don't assume that he's doing it for you. These avadim have a job, and it's not to serve you, it's to serve him, and he's a guy. So therefore, it's mutter to go immediately. You don't have to wait b'chdei sheyas. Let's analyze the sugya that we've already seen a number of times, very briefly. Asulo aron b'charfulo kever. We said that if there was a casket that was built and a kever that was dug, and we thought that it might have been for a guy, we said in our Mishnah it's mutter. Amai. Why do we say it's mutter without the rabbinic injunction of b'chdei sheyasu? Amai, hachanami yamtim b'chdei sheyasu. We should have enlisted the rabbinic injunction. At least wait. How long did it take to knock together a couple pieces of pine with some nails? Just wait a few minutes. Why do you say it's mutter? Amar Ula, you're right in general, but here there's an ukimta, be'omei be'isratia. This is the word we've had this 4 or 5 times in the Masechta. I don't know exactly how many times, but a number of times. It's in a public place. There's no way he dug that for a Jew. It has to be that he dug it for a guy, and therefore there's no need to employ the rabbinic injunction of b'chdei sheyasu. Says Gemara, Teinach kever. All right, you dug a hole in the ground. I see that's in public. How do you know they made the casket there? So says the Gemara, Aron mai ma'ikal meimar Rabbi Abo b'mutal al kibro. No, it's sitting right there. You can tell they built it right there, and therefore in these 2 cases it's very clear that it was done by a guy, and therefore there's no need for b'chdei sheyasu. Mishnah, bottom of Kufnan Aleph, Amud Aleph. Is my computer going to die? No, we're good. Okay, got 17% left. Masnisen, Osin Kol Tzorchei Hames. One is allowed to tend to a mace, Kol Tzorchen Hames, even though we'll see that it's not really Kol Tzorchen Hames. We'll have to get into that. But says the Gemara, Sachin, we're allowed to put some liquids over the mace, Umadichin, so we can rinse off the body. Ubilvad Shelo Yaziz Bo Aver. But you're not allowed to move the body at all. A mace is muksa. A mace is muksa. We'll see in the Gemara today. Afilu David Melech Yisrael. you can't move him either. It doesn't matter. When a mace is a mace, we are no longer who we are. We are just muksa. That's what the Gemara says. However, that said, shomtenes akar mitachtav umatilanoso al hachol bishvil. As we turn to the top, sheyamtin. So the Mishnah writes, we are allowed to slip out the mattress or the pillow that's holding him off of the ground, especially if the ground is colder. Because if the ground is colder, it will prevent the body from decomposing and allow more kavod ameh, so that it's not masriach, so that there's no stench. And that's what's allowed here. Again, you can't touch them. This is like kila achar yad. You're allowed to tilt the body off of the bed that it's lying on if it's going to be then put on the floor, which would be a little bit colder. Says the Gemara, when I used to work on an ambulance, this wasn't uncommon. When we would see people, geriatric patients who would pass away and their mouths would open and rigor mortis would kick in, their jaws would lock. So the Mishnah has a preventative measure for that right when a person dies, says the Mishnah, top line, Kufnan Aleph Amud Beis, Koshrin Es Halechi. You're allowed to tie around the cheeks, top of the head, down under the jaw to make sure that the mouth can stay closed. However, Lo Sheya'aleh, you're not allowed to do it to close the mouth, just that you can prevent it from happening. Ela Shelo Yosif, whatever amount of openness it is. So in that case, you're allowed to tie something to prevent it from opening more. V'chein koreh, similarly, though with much less gravity, similarly, koreh, if there's a beam that breaks shenishbara, somchen osa b'safsal, you're allowed to lodge something against the part that have broken to prevent the break from increasing still more. You're allowed to be somchen osa b'safsal ba'arucho samita, lo shetale, ela shelo tosif. Not to close it up, that's not allowed because that's muksa, ela shelo tosif. Just so that it doesn't get any worse. And that is the Mishnah here. Let's start with the Gemara, 4 lines from the top. Kufnan Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. There was a Talmud of Rabbi Meir's who went into the Beis HaMerchatz with his Rebbe. Bikesh lahadiach karka. He wanted to put a little bit of water on the ground to prevent the dust from kicking up. Amar lo ein madichen. You're not allowed. Lasuch karka. He wanted to put down some oil. And the Rebbe said there too, Amar lo ein sachin. So what do we see from here, from this statement of Shmuel? We see that you're not allowed to anoint that which is muksa. Our Mishnah said that you can do kol sorchei mace. You're allowed to anoint a mace as long as you don't move the body. I'm not moving the ground. I'm sprinkling oil on the ground. What is the problem? Why does Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel say that that's not allowed? But in our Mishnah, we say that it's perfectly permissible. Answers the Gemara, karka bekarka michlafa, mace bekarka lo michlaf. No concern here. We are concerned about aspects of karka, but we're not concerned about that with a mace. So when it comes to ground, we are concerned about the ground that you might come to be metaltal, the ground itself. But when you're being sach a mace, when you're putting some types of anointing oils or perfumes to prevent the smell of decomposition, so there we're not concerned about being michlaf karka, and that's why our Mishnah had a leniency. But the general rule should be that we are not sach things that are muksa. That should be the general rule. Says the Gemara, kol, I hinted to this already when we were learning the Mishnah. What is the kol of our Mishnah? Kol, what is coming to be inclusive? Whenever we see kol, we should always ask ourselves, what is the Mishnah trying to teach us? Kol, le'asuye mai, le'asuye hadatanu rabbanan. What do we learn that can be included in our Mishnah as we take care of a mace? Vivian kli, mekar ve'kli matachos. We can bring cold things, metal things, umanichan al kreso kadesh shelo tafuach, so that we can put them on the body, on the chest of the body, on the stomach of the body. The kreis is technically a stomach, so that it will prevent the swelling from taking place. This is the case when people pass away. There's certain swelling that takes place as the body begins to transition. Upoka kines nekavav as well. One is allowed to close up all of the open orifices in the body. I don't know if this was a medical issue, but they wanted to make sure that the body was going to be totally closed. And that is shaloti kanis behen haruach, to make sure that the body that no air can get in. Shlomo Amar bechachmaso. Shlomo has a pasuk that teaches us a little bit about how to take about the body that has now died. The pasuk says, Ad asher lo yerasek chevel hakesef. What is this reference of the rope that is silver? That's a reference zechut hashidra, speaking about the spine. The pasuk continues, the sarutz gulas hazahav, this bowl of gold. Says the pasuk ze'ama, that is the male anatomy, that's the makom abris. And the pasuk continues with the shaver kad al hamabua. You can put a pitcher on the mabua. Zehakeres, that's the din that we just learned that you're allowed. This was what the word kol in our Mishnah included. And the pasuk concludes vinarota galgal el habor. What is that? The galgal, we'll see that word is very important. Zeh peresh. This is talking about fecal matter. The Chenu Omer, the pasuk says, there's a risi feresh al panechem, feresh chagechem. Feresh, what is feresh al panechem? There's going to be fecal matter on one's face. What is that talking about? Amar Rav Huna va'amri la, Amar Rav Chaga, elu b'nei Adam, shemanichem divrei Torah, v'osin kol yemen kechagim. Every day is a vacation. I never take things seriously. I never buckle down. I'm always just kind of, shmying around, and I'm not buckling down. I'm being maniach divrei Torah, and I'm being osek b'chayisha. So that's the consequence. What's the consequence? Amar Rabbi Levi, Amar Rav Papi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, achar shlosha yamim, after 3 days, kreso nivkas, a person's stomach, their intestines will explode. Felas lo alpana, a busha. That if a person's not careful with the way that they spend their time, if we are not careful with how we are maniach divrei Torah and being osek with all of our days kechagim, then it will be nivkas, kreso nivkas v'nofelas alpana ve'omeres lo. It's as if the stomach is saying back to you, tol mashan asatabi, take back what you put inside of me. We should not be spending all of our days fretting. Let's learn about a very important halachic topic that I hope never comes up. We're not allowed to close the eyes of a mace b'Shabbos. And while a person is davening, while a person is dying, we are not allowed to also close their eyelids. We are afraid that if you hasten the process of closing their eyes, that you are part of the Yitzias Neshama. You are part of the Yitzias Neshama. And it's hareza shofech damim. We'd have to get into that halachically. How does that play out? Let's say as an EMT here on Hatzalah, let's say someone is working on Hatzalah and the person appears to be dead, and you close their eyelids because it's respectful and appropriate, but then they start breathing again, did you make things worse? I don't know how that works medically speaking, but halachically, the Mishnah seems extremely concerned about it. Tanu Rabbana, the Gemara opens halfway down on Kufnan Aleph Amud Beis, second of the widest lines the rabbis teach us. Mashal in there, what is that similar to? A candle, shekava, that's on its way out. Shekava beholeches, the fire is about to go out. You see that it's flickering and its source of wax is waning. There's very, very little bit left. Beholeches, adam maniach etzbo aleha miyad kafsa. The second you put your hand on top of that flame, the flame goes out. So that's the mashal the Gemara is trying to give to show us that we are not allowed to be ma'atzei meinayim, to close the eyes of the mace as they are dying, while the Yitzias Neshama is taking place, lest we hasten their death and be part of that process. Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, if someone wants to close the eyes of a person who has passed away on Shabbos, you should put wine in their nose. I don't know how this is more respectful than keeping their eyes open, but this is what the Gemara says. Putting wine in their nose, shemen bein riseina, putting oil between their eyes, the oches b'shnei godle raglav, and just put your fingers as if you're gripping their 2 large toes. I presume that this is more of a metaphysical representation. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I assume it's not medically, unless it's like reflexology, but it's a dead person. So I'm not exactly sure what Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is talking about, well above my pay grade. Tanya Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he also says about this topic, Tinok ben Yomo, a child who's even only 1 day old. He's not even a bar kayama. Tinok ben Yomo chai, mechalel len alabes haShabbos, David Melech Yisrael meis, ein mechalel len alabes haShabbos. When a person's alive, even a 1 day old baby, no more chashivus than any other human in the world, we are mechal Shabbos. However, when it comes to David Melech Yisrael, once he's a mace, and he is considered muksa. Tinok ben Yomo chai mechal len alabes haShabbos. Why do we need to have any pshat in the Gemara? But nevertheless, the Gemara says, Amra Torah chilel alav Shabbos echad kadei sheyishmor Shabbosos harbe. An idea that we've seen in other places where when Jews are forced to be mechal Shabbos, the Rambam quotes this la halacha, that there are times that we have to make nebuch a decision that we have to be mechal 1 Shabbos so that it enables us to keep more Shabbos in the future. That is being brought here within the framework of pikuach nefashos. That the reason why we are allowed to treat a tinok whose life is on the line is because of this principle of chilal alav Shabbos echad kadei sheyishmor Shabbosos harbe. Why is David HaMelech Yisrael meis ein mechal len alav? Why is that the case? Because kevan shemeis adam batal mina mitzvos, no more. The metaphysical aspects of a mitzvah is that whether or not we understand it, whether or not we like it, the way that mitzvos work, there's a mechanics to them. When we do them, it automatically connects us and tethers us in ways we may not be able to see, touch, or feel, but it connects us more to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and guarantees us a still greater spot in Olam, no matter what happens. It's the nature of mitzvos. And when a person passes away, that metaphysical mitzvah stops. So therefore, the mace is now a golem. He's just a frame. It's just what used to be. The Hainu, the Amar of Yochanan, the Mesim Chafshi, those who are died have been freed from the burden of mitzvos, not in the negative way. I mean, negative in that they're dead, but not that mitzvos are bad. Kevan Shemeis Adam Naseh Choshim Min HaMitzvos. When a person dies, they no longer are able to do mitzvos. V'Tanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Tinok ben Yom Ochai Ein Sarach L'Shomer Min HaChul Min HaChbarim. I guess connected, but really unrelated halachically speaking. You're not going to need to really shoo away a rodent from a child because who's alive. Aval Og Melech HaBashan, the biggest person in the world, if he's meis, Tzarech L'Shomer Min HaChul, we'd have to protect that person from rodents because as long as he's not moving, the rodents won't be scared of his size. Shneimar Morachem L'Chitchem Yeh Kol Zman She'Adam Chai Emaso Mutelas Al Habrios. As long as a person is alive, the fear of that person will be on other animals. But once the person has died, even if they're the size of Og Melech HaBashan, the rodents won't care and they will chew away. Amar Papa Nikitina, and we have a Masora. Aryeh Beit Trei Lo Nafil. A lion will not attack Beit Trei, will not attack two people. Says the Gemara. Disagree. Hakachazinan. That's not true. Says the Gemara. That depends if you're a behemoth. Hakachazina denafil hahu kid Rabbi bar Abba. Dama Rabbi bar Abba ein chaya sholetes be'adam ad shenidmelo kibehema. When do we say that a chaya will attack a person? That's when you act like a behema. Shenamar adam bikar bal yalinim shal kabehemos nidmu. That's a little bit of musar. I would still say that one should not walk with one other person in the lion's den, just out of being precautious. But this is what the Gemara says: is that there's some type of idea that Ein chaya sholates b'adam ashedid melo kid behema. Amar Rabbi Chanina, 2/3 of the way down. Asr lishon b'bayis sechidi. There's this idea, more in the spiritual realms, about not sleeping alone in a home where there is another option. B'chaliyashan b'bayis sechidi achaz to lilis. Lilis is the name of a demon of some kind, and the concern is that lilis will have an impact on that person. The Tanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Asay. This is a reference to tzedakah. We will soon see what all of this has to do with anything. Say, you should give as long as you're capable of giving, as long as you're still alive. He said the same exact thing. What did he say? You should remember your Creator in your young years. Before the bad days come. These are the old days. These are when a person turns very old. You'll get to the years where you say, I have no interest. Wow. According to the Tanakama here, according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, when we get to the times of Mashiach, you've got nothing good coming and you've got nothing bad coming. It seems to be a time of already in that final state. But that is upliga de Shmuel. Not everybody agrees with that. Because Shmuel argues, the Amar Shmuel ein beina olam hazevi mos Mashiach el shibud malchus bilvad. No, the only difference is whether or not we'll be subjugated under other nations. But during the times of Mashiach, things are relatively normal. What's his text proof? Shneimar ki lo yachtal ev yomi keref haaretz. There's still going to be poor people, so you should still give tzedakah, like I framed out a couple of moments ago. That's what we're talking about. Tanya Belazar Kafar Omer lo olam yivakesh adam rachamim al midazo. A person should always speak about this measure about tzedakah. They should always daven that they should have money. If he's not going to become poor, his son will become poor. Being binoloba, and if his son doesn't become poor, then then his grandson will become poor. It never lasts forever. Because of this thing. Look at the play on words. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel Galgal hu. That's from the word biglal. Galgal hu shechozer ba'olam. Wealth is cyclical. It peaks, it has its peaks, and it has its lows. It does not last forever. Not every generation will be wealthy. You might have been born to money and be dirt poor and vice versa. And therefore we should daven for it. Amar Rav Yosef, we have another statement, Nikitina, and we have a tradition. People who are Talmidei Chachamim will never become poor. Says the Gemara, disagree. They knock on our doors all the time. We've written Svarim. These people are special Talmidei Chachamim. So what's pshat there? Says the Gemara, Im Isa Deme'ani, if they're going to become poor, Ahadure Apis Chalo Mehader. It will not get to the point where we'll have to knock on doors. You have to figure out, what does that mean? So according to some of the Meforshim, if you're really a tzur b'mei rabbanan, you won't go knocking on the doors. You don't need to. You don't need to. Rabbi Frand had on one of his tapes, I heard this probably 20 years ago. Rabbi Frand had on one of his tapes, he met an Israeli guy who was mamish davening up a storm in Yerushalayim, and he saw he was tzebrachin. So he went over to the Yid. He says, I don't know you, but like, what is going on? So he said, I don't have any money. So Rabbi Frand said, well, why don't you go collect like all the other people who collect in America? Instead of getting a shekel, you'll get $1 from every house you knock on. So he says, because I know how things work. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go to America. I'm going to schlep around and make a bizayon of myself. I'm not going to get enough money, and I'm going to come home and have to daven anyways. So I'm just going to skip the middle step, and I'm going to daven like a Zion mensch, and Hashem's going to help me. So according to some, that's pshat in this Gemara, which is they're not going to knock on your door because they're okay. They're tzur b'mei rabbanan. The Torah has kind of infused into them. They're good. They'll just talk to a Karesh Baruch Hu straight. They don't have to go through all of the complex means, not to remove hishtadlus. Of course, you need that as well. But otherwise, this Gemara is difficult to understand. 3/4 of the way down, almost done for the night. Amar le Rabbi Chia ledebisu. Rabbi Chia said to his wife, a troubling statement. Ki asya ani, if a poor person knocks on the door, akdimi le rifta. Please make sure to give him bread. Ki hechi delekadmu livnayach. Just so that our sons, should they ever be in need, that because we did good, they'll also be the recipients of good. Right? So says the Gemara, Amra le, she said back to her husband, Rabbi Chia, Melat kalaitas lahu. You're giving a curse to our children, they should be poor. Come on. Why would you say that? Amar la, he said, no. Pasuk. Kra. Kaksi. We have a pasuk that says, Ki biglal hadavar hazeh. The pasuk is biglal hadavar hazeh, because of this. And as mentioned a couple of lines ago, that it's a galgal, that wealth is cyclical and never stays constant. The Tanya Rabbi Shmuel, galgal hu shechozer ba'olam. Tanya, Rabbi Gamliel b'Rabbi Omer, v'nasam l'charachamim b'richem chavir becha. What does that pasuk mean? Kol marachem ala brios, marachem ala b'nashamayim. Anyone who shows mercy on the brios, on the inhabitants of the world, on people. So then, marachem ala b'nashamayim, they will get their own mercy from Hashem. V'chol she'ein marachem al habrios, ein marachem ala b'nashamayim. That if you don't show mercy, you won't get it. It's just basically, you do it, you don't do it, you don't get it. And this is not always easy. Not everyone always presents the way that we would hope they present. They don't always knock on the door with the same tone and the same ziskite that you'd be hoping from everyone who asks for $1. I struggle with this personally. It's hard. But this is the idea. To call him marachem ala brios, marachem ala b'nashamayim. Doesn't mean you have to write him a check, but we have to at least be makabel b'sever panim yafos. We'll stop here. Mirza Hashem will pick up, what's tomorrow? Wednesday. We'll pick up tomorrow night with only one blot of Gemara, and I'm looking forward to that. Have a beautiful night.